this. Okay, so welcome to the last of the scholarly event series for this semester, except for the second scholarly showcase. Showcase. It's Friday, and you can tell. Which invites will be coming out in your email soon if you are watching this online. So my name is Michelle Edwards Thompson. I'm one of the librarians here at Red Deer College, and I'm a member of the Research Commons Steering Committee. We have a couple of other committee members here who are not on camera, but are waving at the people in the room. So Alison Jefferson from the CTL and Krista Robson from the Research Ethics Board have also been involved in this process. So what we're kind of hoping to do is just give you kind of a sense of where this idea came from, why we thought that something like this was necessary at RDC, what we're hoping that it will look like, and then open it up to have a conversation around what people would like this to look like. It's very early stages, and so we really are in the point of having conversations and trying to build it to be something that works for people, because otherwise there's really not a point. So, where I really want to start is by telling you a story. And I'm going to introduce it, and then it's actually a bit of a choose your own adventure story. So, what I want you to do is imagine that you are a brand new faculty member at RDC, and you have an idea for a research project. And so you might kind of talk that through with your colleagues or your friends, maybe your associate dean, maybe your dean, depending on if you happen to have a meeting with them anyway. And kind of get a feel for, do you feel like this is a project that actually is worthwhile? Do we feel like it's something that we should go forward with? This is where it turns into a choose your own adventure. Where do you go next on this campus? You're brand new. And this is actually the audience participation part. Maybe, if it's involving people. Yep, so you might have to figure out who the Research Ethics Board, where they are, how do you contact them, what does that process look like? So you would maybe have to do a little bit of kind of figuring out what that looks like. Where else? Is it on the loop? It's on the public website. I'm not sure it actually is in the loop. And I should mention that I sit on the Research Ethics Board, so it's good that I know that. I know we're on the public web, and that kind of has been more the focus. So yeah, you'd actually have to go to the public web. All the forms are there. There is some contact information. I think more frequently people just show up at Krista's office. Tends to be the route that goes very frequently. But you'd have to kind of know to be pointed to the public web. You'd have to have some sense of that. The other thing that we sometimes run into is, depending on the discipline that you came up with, you might not know that you need research ethics, because you might come from a discipline where you always worked with either paper or dead people, neither of which requires research ethics coverage. And so they sort of forget about that because they've never encountered it before. And then all of a sudden you come to something where, wait a minute, you can't be talking to people about that before you ask permission first. And so Krista also gets to have those conversations, which are less fun. Yeah. Okay, so research ethics. Where else might you need to go on campus?
I don't know where you would go, but if there's funding opportunities. And so being a new person, I wouldn't know where to go.
Absolutely. Huge question. One I had when I was doing a research project a couple of years ago, and we actually were looking at applying for external grants, wanting to know what grant opportunities were even out there. And then if they are out there, do I get a check? What does that look like? How does this process work? It's actually Applied Research and Innovation who handles all of that. But you have to know that, and then you have to know who to talk to in Applied Research and Innovation to get some sense of that. So that took me about a week to figure out how to make that happen. And then you have to make a meeting with somebody, and then you have to wait to get to the meeting with somebody. And in the meantime, the grant deadline has passed and life has moved on. So yeah, Applied Research and Innovation is another actually big player. They're also who you would talk to if you wanted to connect with the community in any way. So you wanted to say, I have this really great project, but I actually think that it would be great if we partnered with somebody out in the community. Is there some way that we can do that? Do you know people who kind of are interested in this? That goes through them as well. But you might not instinctively go there for that connection either. Where else?
Well, if you want to publish it when you're done.
Yep. Where do you go?
I would go to the library.
Says the librarian. Yes, you would go to the library, which is actually part of our mandate to help you figure out what are the journals that are available in your field. If you're publishing in a new field and you've never done this before, what does that look like? I get questions about, do I own my own intellectual property? And then we have to start to talk to some people about the policy, and they have to go back and look at their dean, and then a whole conversation happens because it depends on what the research was and how that interacts with a lot of other things. So that actually is a very complicated question. But we know that at least there's a policy, so we can direct you that far. At the library, we're probably also going to have a conversation with you about open access, because depending on if you did get a grant, you might be required to publish open access. More and more grants are actually requiring that. And if you've never heard that before, then you don't even know what you're doing there. So you might have to kind of talk to us. You might be going to the policy department. You might be going back to your dean. There might be a whole lot of stuff that's happening there. We also would talk to you about the copyright. So if you are publishing in a traditional journal, do you keep your copyright? Do you sign over your copyright rights? Think about that, because the journal is automatically going to want copyright, but there are negotiating points there that, again, you might not realize are there if you've never published before, or if you're publishing in a new field. So for those scholars, because we have a mix on this campus, we have people who have a long history of scholarly work because they've kind of come up through the more traditional academic ladder, for lack of a better term. And we have a lot of people who are doing phenomenal work who are not traditional academics, who are great teachers and they're asking teaching questions, or who are doing different things in terms of trades research that, again, didn't follow that academic model, but maybe they do want to publish that result and tell other people about it. What does that look like for them? How does that happen? So library for all of those things. What about if it's a scholarship of teaching? So you have questions about your teaching. People come and talk to Allison in the CTL all the time about that. And she gets to answer all sorts of interesting questions, I think, about how do I actually survey my students? And so she kind of is being asked to advise on everything from methodology to, again, she often kind of brings that you might want to talk to Krista and research ethics about doing this. And we're seeing a real increase in that because the ETOL program and a lot of those other programs are starting to really raise the profile of scholarship of teaching and learning as a field on this campus. And so a lot of people who, again, may have come through a very different academic tradition are now living in a whole other world where the conferences are different, the journals are different, the methodology is different, everything about that looks different. How do you enter into that? Who else might you come to? What about PD? If you're faculty. So you might want to go to a conference. You might want to apply for a sabbatical. If you have a really big project, then you need to figure out, how do I do that? What does the sabbatical form look like? Does anybody know what I'm supposed to say on it? How do those things work? What's the deadline? Oh, it was last week. Well, okay, good to know. Now what am I going to do? If you're staff, what does that look like? Because they don't have the same support for those sorts of activities. But we know that staff on this campus do research. What about if you're a student and you're working with a faculty member? Again, the financial sorts of supports are very different, again, for what that can look like. And are there pots of money where faculty members can take students with them to conferences? No. But students have different pots of money that they actually can apply to, because there are often conferences will have students can apply at a reduced rate and things like that. They need to know that that's available to them, though. So you might end up talking to faculty PD around that. We also have a couple of committees on campus who actually work specifically with faculty around that. So once you've published and you've done phenomenally, maybe you want to apply for the Scholarly Recognition Award that we offer every year. Again, who do you talk to about that? What does that application process look like? What do they need to know? What's the deadline? That comes through your email. So if you're good about reading it, which some people are and some people are not, depending on the time of year, you might miss that too. And how do you kind of go back and find that information afterwards? We also have a committee on campus who do a lot of work around trying to promote the scholarly activity that's happening. So you might be talking to them. You might actually be talking to marketing, because maybe marketing wants to actually put out a press release and try and get the media involved to talk about whatever that is. Or the flip of that is that often marketing gets requests. So something's happening in the world, the media want to talk to an expert who's doing research in that field. They need to have some way of finding out that information. So lots and lots and lots of people. It's a bit of a maze currently on campus to try and figure all of that out. So that's if you're a new faculty member. Imagine if you're a student trying to figure all of that out. Like faculty at least kind of talk to each other, and there's a bit of an expectation about this. For students and for staff, where that's not traditionally been a staff role, but again, we know that it happens, how do they get tapped into all of these things? So what kind of happened over the course of about a year was that we were seeing these at the Research Ethics Board. We were having conversations with Allison where she was like, people are asking me stuff that's not really Center for Teaching and Learning, but I'm not quite sure where to send them. And we'd all had our own experiences of doing research and actually trying to navigate all of this. At the same time, I was reading a whole bunch of stuff around kind of one of the research projects that I was doing was actually a multi-institutional research project. So it was very interesting to kind of connect with things that I had a really hard time answering on my campus. Other people would say, well, I just went to the research office and they told me the grants because that's what they're in charge of. And it's the same person who does research ethics. And it's because on most bigger research campuses, there is a traditional research office, and that tends to be the sorts of things they're in charge of. Primarily funding, research ethics, and kind of making sure that there's some integrity to that scholarly process. And then sometimes they're in charge of the promotion of scholarly activity, sometimes they're not. It depends on the campus and how that looks. What is happening though is that there are gaps in that. There's still not somebody who's helping with the methodology piece. There's still not somebody who can say, hey, I've done qualitative research my whole life. Now I want to do quantitative research. Does anybody know what this statistical thingy is? Who do I talk to about that? How do I figure? You're kind of depending on a very informal personal network that you happen to know somebody who might have some expertise who could put you in connection with helping that out. And what we're also seeing is a lot of kind of new questions come up around as people start to do some really interesting work around data visualization, working with big data and kind of doing all of these other things. And some of those grants that are requiring you to publish open access are actually also requiring you to make your data available. And so who's going to help you with that and how does that work? Libraries are kind of sliding into that because that has been what we typically have done in a lot of other ways is supported the research process. We're the ones who tend to buy the materials. We're the ones who teach your students and often partner with you to teach your students in how to do this. So it kind of felt like a natural, it's feeling like a very natural progression on a lot of campuses. What a lot of them are doing is creating something called research commons. They tend to be a little more focused towards grad students because that tends to be where the gap is. The assumption is that if you're a faculty member, you've already gone through the PhD process and you've kind of been apprenticed in this mode, for lack of a better term, and you've had somebody, and an entirely different session would be good advisors versus bad advisors in terms of master's and PhD work, because sometimes that apprenticeship process is a good one, and sometimes it's you survive it, I think, and get through. But grad students don't necessarily have that, or what the grad students were saying is, it's my very first conference ever. What does it look like to present? How do I do that? That's a terrifying thing for me. How do I create a poster? Because I've never done that before, but that's what I'm doing. How do I talk to other people who are feeling as stressed out about this as I am? That's not the Grad Student Association. And so these research commons are actually being created as places that support those grad students, but then they're finding that faculty are taking advantage of those too, because they're proving to be really collaborative spaces where people are starting to have some really interesting conversations. So there's a couple that we've really been looking at. University of Washington, we did discover it had to be the pen. You can see that they've created these really interesting spaces where people can kind of get together and work. One of the things that a lot of faculty members are sometimes identifies that it's really hard to get research done in your office because you're being interrupted with students, you're being interrupted with all the committee work, with all of the administrative stuff that you have to do. You need to go somewhere other than to do your research work, especially if you're writing or you're trying to read something or you're doing data analysis and you're kind of stuck with that. So some of them are creating these quiet spaces that are a third space where people can go work. This one also has a lot of really cool technology that's specific to, for them, they're very big on data visualization. So they've really invested in some technology that helps faculty members with that specifically. One of the other examples that we have been really interested in has to go back to present. Come on. University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill has about 5 of these connected to their different science libraries because they're big. So they have one that's just about GIS and mapping technology and doing some very cool things. They've also connected them very intentionally with their makerspaces. So the makerspace and the research, they call it the research hub. They again are very interested in interdisciplinary and collaborative work. They've done some really cool things connecting up arts faculty and science faculty to kind of help the art students and visual arts students show the science faculty how to visualize the things that they're trying to teach and demonstrate it in really different ways. And then that's gone forward. So they've done some really cool stuff that is very intentionally, we want interdisciplinary work happening in this space. So you can see they're doing all sorts of visualized geospatial data. They've got 3D printers and models. We also have those. They're part of applied research here, so it's not that we don't have them. The third one. Ohio State. Again, if you take a look at them, they've kind of, what is really interesting about them is that they're doing much more similarly what we have done. They didn't build their space for 2 years. So they had a research common that was way more about doing workshops, about consultations, and they took a really long time to figure out what's the space that we want that's going to fit what this has actually turned out to be. So they are just opening the space this coming fall. So what you're seeing right now are just the drawings of what it's going to be, because I think they're still in the building process. But some really cool things are happening. But what they were finding were, we're giving workshops on how to apply for. Similarly, what we have done, we don't want to take over services. What we want to do is partner with the places that these things are already happening in campus and put them all in one location. So you just have to go one place and then we figure out who it is that you need to talk to and we go from there. So the pen is weird. I'm just saying. What we have kind of envisioned, we did a lot of reading, and I sort of, when I started reading about this, I said to Krista and I said to Allison, and I talked to a couple of other people from some of those research committees and said, hey, does it seem like something that might actually answer some of these things that we're seeing at the college, that maybe it would be workable here? And I was getting a lot of nods and a lot of, yeah, go forward. This actually seems like it might solve some of these problems. So we put together a concept paper. We sent it kind of up to Paulette and got her approval to at least start to explore it further. Where we are now is that we are open as of today in pilot. So right now it's going to be in a temporary space because we're still figuring out what the space needs are. We do have a web space, and what we're starting with are the consultation pieces. We're doing a lot of conversations right now with people around, what do you want from this? What do you wish that it would do for you? What would you want to access through it? What questions does it need to answer? And then we're working on building a 5-year plan that we can bring back to the college and say, okay, we're starting small. We're starting with, like, let's just figure this out on the ground. 5 years from now, this is what we think it could be. Let's talk about how we get from A to B. So there is a web presence. And right now what it does is it gives you some sense. This is a blog that the homepage that will be updated quite frequently. So you can see right now there actually is a grant development workshop happening at UC in a couple of weeks that we posted the information on that people can still register for if they want to. We have a link to the basic policy around what scholarship actually is on campus here. We use the Boyer model. So the Research and Scholarship Committee does a lot of work around trying to kind of get people to understand what that Boyer model is if they haven't encountered it before, because it is a little bit wider than the traditional understanding of research. And there's also some nice examples up here of what other people on campus have done. So if you don't have a good sense of that, or you're just kind of wanting to get your feet wet, what are the possibilities? So this again will start to change as we get more of those options and as we have a sense of what do other people want to know. We did link all of the policies that you might come into contact with. It's a big list, but you might not know that. So we try to, again, put all of that in one place so that at least you can start somewhere with having some sense of, okay, apparently there's an integrity in research and scholarship policy. Maybe I should find out what that says. We have specifically a page on SOTL, which is the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, because there's been such an increase in that on campus. It's what I'm hearing a lot of people talk about as people work through the ETAL program and some of the other programs that the Center for Teaching and Learning is doing. There's a lot more conversation around not just improving your teaching in class, but how do you actually measure the impact of these changes that you're making? And how do you then start to tell other people that this piece that I'm doing, this change that I made, is actually making a difference, and you might want to think about doing it too. So there's a whole section on that because we know there's a lot of questions around specifically that on campus. There is a part on research ethics. So if you don't know to go to the public website to find it, or you don't happen to know where Krista's office is, this at least gives you a sense, and it also links out to the Tri-Council policy statement, which is the government policy statement that governs all of this. So giving people some sense of that. Right now, there's a little bit on funding. There's some sort of standard pieces where we do a lot of work with Alberta Health. We've got a lot of pieces in with SSHRC. We've done some work with NSERC, so those are the standard ones there. Again, that's going to start to be updated as Applied Research and Innovation has a better sense of what kinds of research people are doing. So therefore, what kinds of grants would be appropriate. This is the place where they'll be able to start to put some of that information. So very bare bones right now, we're developing, but this is the piece where we want to know what it is that you want to know. The library has got some information there. If you've never published in a journal before, we've got some lists for these are good places to start looking at. We've got some pieces as well around something called predatory publishers, which is where people will kind of ask for a lot of money and then have you publish in a journal that's not quite as reputable as you might like. So how do you start to identify that? Because that's not the route that you want to go. And then also some space on author rights. So if you are publishing, the Spark addendum talks about ways that you can start to negotiate different means of copyright. What do those pieces look like? And then there's a bunch on here as well around open access publishing. Eventually, we're going to have some pieces in here as well about how you actually measure the impact of your scholarly work. So how do you start to see how many other people have cited you? How can you start to track what that conversation looks like so that as you're starting to do your work, you can start to talk about more, not just that I published, but I published in this journal and this many other people have now cited and built on that work, and you can interact in that conversation in a very different way. So where we live and how to find us. For the summer, April to August, we are living in the Teaching Common in the Center for Teaching and Learning, so room 913C. There are a number of people from all of these different departments who are in here available for consultations and doing office hours. So we're not there 8 to 4, 5 days a week. What we've done is published a schedule where you can go in and you can see week to week who's actually in there. And is that the person that I think maybe can answer my question? If you're not sure, any one of us is happy to have an initial conversation with you and then help you figure out who it is that you want to talk to from there. And we can start to connect you up. So we are physically there at specific times. There is also an email address that goes to all of us. So if you email us because those times don't work for you, but you say, hey, I want to meet with somebody or I have this question, you send that email, it comes out to all of us, and then we can go from there and try and connect you up and help you figure it out. So where we are right now, we kind of have started with this. We're asking a lot of questions. What do you guys want this to be? What do you want it to look like? How can we build in some things that eventually will start to make this a more useful process? We're hoping 3 to 5 years from now, one of the things we've talked a lot about is a mentorship program. So people who are very experienced in various different kinds of research or have been successful in applying for things like SSHRC grants, which is in and of itself an enormous undertaking. Can they start to mentor people who might be interested in that process? And can we start to take a look at how can we connect those people up? Eventually there'd be a physical space that will start to build those things. It will be in the library, but we have to do some furniture moving there first. So that's why it's in the teaching common for the summer. And then we're going to kind of figure it out from there. Steering committee people, what have I missed? Okay. So then really, the rest of it is about what would you like to see? What could this look like? What do you want to know? We want people to talk to us about that at this point, because we don't want to spend a lot of time building something that people aren't going to find useful and miss the boat on the stuff that people really do actually want to have information on. So if you are online right now, email that Research Commons email address. Let us know. We're also coming to most of the school council meetings over the next couple of months, so we will have a chance to have this conversation again with a whole bunch of different people. And then probably again, you'll start to see us in the fall talking about a lot of these pieces and how you can start to bring students in to make sure that they're also a part of the process. We're starting with faculty because they're a little further along the line in terms of having to do this work. But the hope is that by next fall, we can start to bring more students into this so that they also have a place where they can start to get some of these questions answered. Their faculty advisors do some of that, but it would be nice if they had a way to connect up with other students who are doing that kind of research and have a sense of how does that work. If you're an undergraduate student and you're working as a research assistant, where do you go to get help? This should be the place for that as well. Questions? Thoughts? It's okay if we end here.
One thing to do, let them know how to report their scholarly activity after it's taken place. We do an online survey, and that's what goes towards the numbers for the proportion of scholarly activity for each program. And some people just don't fill it out, or they don't fill it out on time. So it's just kind of letting them know about what that process is. So that way their efforts are being recognized and those numbers that go forward. So that goes towards a lot of reporting documents for the college. So I guess it's just about closing that loop, because publication is one thing, but then it's us being able to say, look, this is the percentage of our faculty engaged in scholarly activities of different types. So
absolutely.
I think as that awareness increases, I think that's a good thing. I'm on the research on scholarly activity, and as we get out to the schools and the schools start defining that, also I think, you know, business school, we're just not recognizing it. We're doing it. It's just not being recognized and reported sufficiently. So I think that reporting piece is huge.
And as people get a better understanding of what that Boyer model means, and because I think that's where, again, there's a lot of lack of understanding that you are doing it. You didn't go out and conduct a formal experiment and come back and publish it in a formal journal, but you did still engage in scholarly activity, and that's important for people to understand.
We've really expanded that survey now so that you can fill out any kind of other activities that you've done that may not necessarily fit what some people may see as the traditional definition of scholarly activity, where one ends up in a journal or one ends up wherever else. But yeah, I guess just increasing that awareness and letting them know of, hey, you know, you've done this, and this is the different ways that this should be reported. I guess maybe even the schools championing scholarly activity would be something good to know.
Yeah.
We're looking to move towards promoting academic excellence. I feel like that could support that as well.
We sort of on the steering committee see a very direct connection there. That's the more that people in the outside community are aware that we have a lot of people on campus who are engaged in some really amazing work.
Yeah.
The more that we can promote that, the more that that starts to increase the academic reputation of the institution. Absolutely.
Is there going to be any work done or opportunities for students that, like, didn't say Agora or anything like that to be able to work through?
Well, so typically, because Agora is kind of built on stuff that they would have done in the classroom, so that is still supported. But it could be that as we start to look to, one of the things the library is looking at is an institutional repository that would allow, again, some form of the faculty on campus to deposit their work. We'd also like to see the students be able to do that. So is there a way that we could be publishing an online version of Agora where students could then link out to that, and when they're applying for jobs, they'd be able to actually show people, this is the work that I've done. So Agora, the science students, all of those students, how do we start to showcase their work as well? Absolutely. Yeah.
I think the steering committee's been working on, so what does the pilot look like? What does it look like next year when it's out of the pilot phase into a more semi-permanent potential space? What does it look like in 3 years? What does it look like in 5 years? And I think in 3 to 5 years, it would be great to have display space for people's physical work, so that people walking through can go, oh, there's that and there's that, as well as a digital repository. Because more and more institutions are moving towards having a digital repository for the work that their students, faculty, and staff are producing. So
And for those students, so in visual arts, for instance, where the thing that they produce often isn't something that you could put in an institutional digital repository, but it's a physical thing that we still would like to have a display place for. I know that some of the trade students actually, when they're preparing for the skills competitions, those students who do, actually create things that come out of that you could display somewhere, that this is a really cool display of this weld. And then we would have somebody explain how the rest of us know that who don't understand the weld. But show us, explain to us why this is a really good example of your discipline. How do we understand that? And we want it to be something that fits everything that's done at the college.
I think that's awesome. I really like how you're gonna build the space after you identify what the needs are. That way you're able to really figure out what's gonna be important to have there before you have a structure, then try to make that what you the needs fit the structure.
Well, because it could be that, like, the research says faculty want this third space. Maybe nobody on this campus does. So in that case, okay, let's not build that. If everybody here feels like they're good, let's not make space that doesn't fill a need that isn't there, right? So how do we kind of make it be something? One of the things one of the other steering committee members has talked about a lot is the idea of kind of a front porch space. So a space where you can just gather and have informal conversations with other people who are doing this work and kind of say, hey, I've kind of hit this roadblock. Have you run into this in the past? How can I, not in a formal mentoring relationship sort of a way, but just a way that you can sit down and have those conversations. The University of Washington runs their version of open mic nights. So where you can actually go and practice a presentation before you take it to a conference, or you do something like that and get some feedback from your colleagues and other people. So again, for the grad students particularly, they were like, we want somebody to look at this before we go stand in a room of how many people. But why does it have to be just students? Why can't it be students working with faculty and going back and forth, and everybody kind of giving that a go as far as, I'm taking this on the road. What have I missed? What are people going to ask a lot of questions about, so that you can practice that before you do it the first time? So a couple years down the road, that might be something that we're doing.
That'd be great, especially for conference presentations.
Mhm.
As long as you're just presenting to people within your own department or working with whomever you trapped in a room.
Yeah.
They'll say you're great to leave.
Exactly. But where you know, somewhere where you are getting honest feedback before you are in a room where people, like, depending on the discipline and depending on the conference, there are some where people will go try to find the hard questions. Be somewhere first where people will ask that and you can practice the answer and you know what you're going to say when those things come up, so that then when it comes up in the event, you're more comfortable with that.
and modeling, I think, the various types of conferences, because conferences can be very different. And so if you don't know that, maybe you apply to go to a conference where you're expected to read your 15-minute paper and then answer 6 questions, that's good to be prepared for.
Because that's not or the vice
Or
versa.
the vice versa of, what do you mean it's us sitting around the table talking and I'm not reading my paper?
Because again, different disciplines do that very differently. And so if you're used to one discipline and then you go to a different conference, it's very eye-opening for those of us who've done it and said, I'm sorry, you're doing what now? This is not what I planned on.
middle reading your paper and you're done.
Yeah.
So it's another good way to practice.
I had to do one this fall where I had 8 minutes to
Yes,
present.
Exactly.
That was a very different kind of stress because I can talk for a long time. To reduce my comments to 8 minutes and then be cut off was a very specific, okay, how am I going to get the key points out really quickly? Because once those of us who are used to kind of lecturing for 50 minutes or 80 minutes, asking us to talk for 8 is actually enormously challenging. So that one, did do some practicing in front of colleagues and my dog and other people to get the timing of that right.
Would this be a space too where the collab students who do, I guess, book with an honors equivalent,
Mhm.
would be able to connect and maybe find a potential supervisor?
Hopefully, yeah.
And so we don't just like hunt them down in the hall, so it's easy.
Hey.
Yeah.
And I think also thinking about, like, because you're kind of, in some ways you need an advisor who's part of your program, but is there somebody else on campus who's actually doing work that connects with that, who could also really inform what you're doing and be helpful in terms of the advice? So somewhere that you can make that connection as well, because it could be that you're in sociology, but there's somebody in health sciences who's actually doing this really interesting work that intersects directly with yours. Let's make sure you get to have a conversation with them too. I don't know whether you're allowed to have co-advisors in collab, but. Yeah, so it depends on the program, and I remember when I was doing mine that I found somebody where I was like, this wasn't really what I was going to do, but your specialty is this, so I guess now I'm going to write a little bit about that and a whole bunch about this other thing that I'm interested in because you've agreed to advise on this. So, okay, that's how we're going to make that fit. We kind of don't want you to have to do that if we can avoid it, right? I think the other thing, certainly from applied research's standpoint, is that it also is a place where the community can come. So if you have somebody from out in the community who's saying, like, we really actually would be interested in having somebody investigate this further, we think that we have a research question, we don't quite know where to go. Sometimes they come to applied research, but applied research doesn't always know either who to connect that person with. So this would be somewhere that they could come, and then we would help them try and figure out, is there somebody on campus who has the interest and the capacity to be able to help you connect with this, and then get some students involved in that as well, so that they're also becoming part of that project. So really the whole idea is a lot of this already happens on campus. We just want to put it in one space so that it's easier to figure it out.
That might encourage more research and development activities. If you get started, then people might be more willing to undertake it rather than, oh, I have no idea even where to start.
And so a lot gets stopped at that point. So that's the hope, but we want to know, again, what will make that work for people? So. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming and for your ideas. Again, for the people watching online, if you have ideas, it's researchcommon@rdc.ab.ca. Email us, connect with us. We want to hear what you think. Yeah, exactly. They'll edit that out afterwards. Thank you.
Very good interview.
Thank you.